There's a metaphor I use all the time is if you say yes to everybody, you're like that lifeguard that tries to save everyone, then they drown. And so enablement leaders in particular, they have to be very judicious about the priorities they choose to take on. I don't believe that to be effective as a head of enablement, you have to have sold before. Half people will disagree with me on that, and that's okay. Manager enablement is the most underfunded thing that has the highest ROI, period.
Tell me about your recommendation to a CRO who already hired an enablement person. And unfortunately, the enablement leader is struggling. Hey, Dave. How have you been?
I've been very good. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Look, I'm super excited because you're someone who's super deep into enablement. It's beyond just doing the job. So I want to hear from your perspective. How did you start and what are you working on these days?
Yeah, it's been a journey, as I think most folks in enablement didn't plan on doing enablement. And it's such an up-and-coming space. So a million years ago, I was a sales trainer before we had the term enablement, and did that for a bunch of years. And then I went to the dark side. I was a salesperson, then a sales leader for a bunch of years. And then I was selling at an enablement technology company called Saleshood. And I really started to see that so many of these companies we were talking to were struggling to find a really good sales enablement leader. And I was saying, well, I know that person who's looking and this person's really good. And I was starting to very organically help people find new roles because I was seeing these patterns. And about 6.5 years ago, I took that idea and made it into a business. And so that was EnableMatch. That's how it was born. And it was really just organically that many revenue leaders didn't just want a warm body in these enablement seats, that they actually wanted somebody who was revenue minded, was good with the team, like just they knew what they were doing. They weren't just talking, they were doing, they were action oriented. And that was my founding hypothesis. And 6.5 years later, my dumb little idea was not so dumb and not so little. And that's what I do now.
Oh, there you go. Right on. 6-7 years running the business. It means you're doing something right. So congratulations. But let me start by asking, who is a great enabler? Because you mentioned if they want to get someone who actually is revenue minded, who can work with the team. Can we just expand on this a little bit, based on your experience working with a lot of enablers in this space?
Yeah, and it's tricky because like in a lot of industries, you can take a certification that Dave knows accounting, Dave knows X. And so that's great for certain places. In our world, it's not so objective. But I think there are things that you can index on and focus on that will kind of pull in the good folks. So I will say this, first and foremost, sales enablement is a people business. And when I say people, I don't mean people like them and they're friendly to others, like, no. But what I mean is they have the desire and the ability to work well with the other stakeholders. So like as a very clear example, I had a person who I was working with a couple of years ago, and she said very clearly, she's a pretty high level, the reason I've been successful over the past 9-10 years at my company is I built up this internal capital with other stakeholders, marketing, operations, HR, sales organization, to get stuff done. It's that capital that has allowed me to get major programs off the ground and be successful. And so when I talk about people skills, I talk about the ability to accrue this capital, to know how and when and where to spend that capital. And that's not something you learn in school. It's something you just kind of have a sense for. And so just kind of understanding how I want to work with these people to get my programs off the ground and successful. So I think a lot about that part of it. And I also think about like the good ones, especially as you talk about enablement leaders, they're not yes people. In fact, the really good ones are very good no people. People might understand these examples, but like if you're a head of enablement and your CMO comes to you and says, hey, I have this great new 45-page deck that I want to certify the organization on next month. Go make that happen. The bad enablers say I'm on it, but the good enablement folks, they have the gravitas, the wherewithal to say, I hear you, but let's talk about it because 45 slides is not so practical for the sales organization. And secondarily, like, why exactly are we doing this? And maybe we want to pick the best 4 or 5 slides and figure out that. And like, because that's really what they will actually use. And so the ability to push back is so essential. And like that is something that a lot of folks truly struggle with. It's not just in their natural DNA. And so having that gravitas will make them successful. There's a metaphor I use all the time is if like you're the if you say yes to everybody, you're like that lifeguard that tries to save everyone, then they drown. And so enablement leaders in particular, but everybody enablement, they have to be very judicious about the priorities they choose to take on. And if everything is a priority, then nothing's a priority. And so I think the good ones really are savvy about pushing back with their boss and other executives to really hold themselves and the organization accountable to those priorities. Like those are a couple things. You can also talk about best practices and understanding of what are good best practices. What I see a lot of times is a CRO might say, "Oh, here's this old sales leader I know from the past. I want to make 1,000 of him or her, and then make that person my enablement person." But there is a thing about best practices in our space that how you get things done effectively. Like there's just things, tricks of the trade, and so I think people who have some time in the saddle are really good. And the last thing I will say is, I think people who understand how to run it like a business, that there are inputs and outputs, and there are people that you are beholden to, but there's accountability, and you're running Enablement like a business that you are delivering for the business, and you have business KPIs that you're held accountable to. That's if you can get all of that in one person, that's a pretty good start.
I would say so too. Like this is so fascinating. What you're saying, you're describing a very, very capable enterprise seller, but right now your audience is more internal. So
Yes.
first and foremost, do your discovery. And honestly, a great leader, whether it be a CMO or a CRO or whoever you're reporting to, they want to hear different ideas. They want to hear pushback. Maybe they don't even know much about enablement as you do. So giving that reality check by saying, hey, I'm not taking orders. Let's have a conversation to really break this down and see if we are spending like $2 million on a sales methodology that nobody's going to adopt. And I'm hearing this over and over again in this podcast. Someone just came in just recently. We rolled out $2 million and poof, nothing happened. So
Yes.
this is a good example just to throw out there. Like, hey, why do we even considering this project? Why are we just looking at this project? Let's just go through this wise and understand like where I sit in terms of being a strategic partner rather than someone who's taking your order. And I think that requires a lot of guts
Yes.
and professionalism to do this tactically for the benefit of the business, as you said. This is really fascinating.
And I'll piggyback on your point. I it's incumbent upon a lot of the revenue and operations leaders who are working with enablement to not always have the answers and be open to ideas and feedback. And so what I always think about is the head of enablement and the head of revenue need to come to an agreement on what are the priorities, like the what. Like, what do we focus on this quarter or this year? New logos, expansion, whatever that what is. But defer to enablement on the how. So, all right, how are we going to go about getting the team better at discovery? How are we going to go about building programs for logo expansion, wherever that is? But again, we agree on the what, but be a little bit deferential to the enablement folks on how you actually get that part of it done. Because as I said before, there are best practices and tricks of the trade that they can bring to the table, and just be open to the fact that the way it's maybe worked in the past is not really the best way today.
And also, you mentioned something interesting as well. You said, "Hey, build this relationship internally with different departments." So you have, firsthand insight and also support from marketing, from even product. Get your hands dirty and understand like what they are working on. what their day-to-day might look like. And then you can bring this as an insight to CRO or CMO or whoever you're reporting to. So this is the perspective from 4 different departments that are working hand in hand. So that's why my how means something. It's not only about external knowledge that I gain over the years. This is extremely important to your point. I have this ability. That's why I'm in the seat. But also I understand what's going on internally. So maybe that's the reason why you need to listen to me.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I always talk about, if you're the enablement leader in particular, and you're in the meeting with your revenue leader, like you need to speak up and have a point of view. And when done properly, you're a two-way conduit between the sales leadership team and the field. Like things you're observing in the field and sharing that back with the leaders are like, hey, that deck we just rolled out, like it's not, no one's really using it, it's not working. So you're passing information from the field to the leaders, which maybe it's not exactly what they hear through their normal one-on-ones and what they do. And so I think you providing them insights, to your point, is a way to build a lot of trust and credibility. Is you're giving them stuff that they didn't know on their own. And then conversely, you're also a translator of what the sales leadership team wants for the field, and maybe helping them. Maybe it's more digestible and broken down in a way they can work with it. But it's really powerful when it's this two-way communication system between the leadership and the field.
Just definitely a glue in between everyone. Enablement just really make everyone closer in the revenue organization. So Dave, let me ask you this: when should we even consider hiring actually an enablement professional for our organizations?
Yeah, it's a very big burning question for a lot of smaller companies. And the way I think about it is as follows. If you're early and you're not quite sure what playbooks work, like what the motion is that will result in a win, it's probably too early. Like if you're throwing spaghetti against the wall and saying, let's try this messaging and let's try this playbook, that's probably too early because you have nothing to replicate. You have nothing to clone. And whereas fast forward months or years, when all of a sudden you're like, hey, we're seeing some predictability. And if we do the following 6 steps in our sales cycles, we usually win the deals. You have some predictability and repeatability. And so at that point, it makes a lot of sense to say, okay, let's memorialize and codify that playbook and then train the rest of the organization on that. But you have to have something to clone. And again, when you're a little bit early, you don't really have predictability. It's probably too early. So I think that for me, that's the inflection point is when you realize, okay, we kind of know how to win these deals. And I think related to that, I think about if you're moving from founder-led sales to a proper sales organization, that's also a good time because you're trying to extract everything you can from that founder's brain and take sales off of their plate so they can go off and do the CEO founder job, and then have the sales organization be able to be self-sufficient without the founder. And so I think those are the signs I look for. What happens more often than not, candidly, is people come at it too late, meaning they have predictability. They're trying to get by as long as they can. They go. They onboard people who haven't kind of learned the right way, and people are kind of just figuring stuff out on their own. And all of a sudden you have the people who are hitting their numbers and those who aren't. You're not seeing more predictability across the organization, uniformity in how they sell. And that's just a result of enablement not having a heavy enough of a hand early enough.
So let me ask you a follow-up question for this, because most of our audience, they're either at Series B, Series C, they're growing extremely fast, and they somehow have the product market fit, if you will, because they're growing, they're hiring a lot of sellers. They all have over 50 sellers in the org. Or we have later stages, these are large enterprises, some of them post IPO, and they have more structure and scalability is the issue. So for the guys that are looking at Series B, Series C, and they're growing, typically what we see is like head of sales still trying to somehow act as as an enablement person, although maybe they never had a background in enablement.
Yes.
So they have maybe a performance coaches, or some of their leaders might just do some enablement here and there. What are the risks that you've noticed running this enablement organization this way at that stage?
At a certain point, you have to have some differentiation of roles, and at a certain point, the sales leader's time is better spent managing the sales organization. And if they are pulled into extra enablement stuff, it is at a cost. And so I think about it as there's so many hours in the day, and if the sales leader is still the de facto enablement person, or even a sales manager might even be kind of tasked as this, which is very common, it is at a cost. And so what I would say is there's a point where you need the differentiation in roles. You want somebody who is specialized in building onboarding or scaling or building playbooks, whatever that is. And as I said earlier today, there are best practices. There are ways to do it that are more effective than others. Like I was talking to somebody last week, and they were saying when they were onboarded, it was like, I want to say it was like 40 something hours of talking head video. Like just you sit down, you hit play for 40 hours, and then you are done. I hopefully the audience will agree that that's not the most effective, right? That's a little bit old school. And so I think there is a lot of ideas of like, okay, we know what we want to do, but now let's look at a better way to do that. I think sometimes Enable can say, well, if we chop that thing up into 85 pieces and we do some certifications and some quizzes and we do some role plays in here, and then all of a sudden it's like this thing comes to life and it's better. So I think there is, when the leader kind of holds on too long, they're doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, and they're probably not always taking advantage of newer technologies or ways of doing things. And so it's just while they have the best of intention, it's more of a hindrance than a help.
Very interesting. Just know when it's time to really focus on revenue and let someone else take care of enablement. So in terms of attributes, you're absolutely right. They need to have people skills. They need to have revenue mindset, and we discussed this earlier. In terms of experience on the paper, I know this is not the best way to hire, and you are the expert. You tell me what works. But where do they need to actually start, and what to look for in terms of experiences to get things started?
All right, I will say something that probably half of your audience will disagree with me on, so we'll be a little controversial here. I don't believe that to be effective as a head of enablement, you have to have sold before. Now, again, half people will disagree with me on that, and that's okay. But let me make my case, okay? Because I think this is an important thing that comes up a lot. When you say you want a person who has carried a bag and sold before, what your people are generally saying is that I want somebody who is empathetic to sales. They understand the highs and the lows and the emotions and the frustrations. You understand that. That's A. And secondarily, somebody who has credibility with the field, right? They can stand in front of them, and you're not sounding like you're clueless about sales, and your terminology is askew. Like you want to be able to have authority and command the room and have the presence to have them respect you. That's generally what you're solving for. Like I want to get that. And the shorthand is, well, if they carried a bag before, clearly they'll have those two things. I think that's wrong in a few different ways. A, because there are many sellers who wouldn't have credibility. Maybe they weren't successful as sales reps, and maybe they were just low-level sellers, not enterprise sellers. And so I think that ticking that box doesn't necessarily give you what you want. What I will contend until I'm 6 feet under is the following. I would get a person who, if they don't have sales experience directly, they are a student of sales. And what I mean is they are insatiably curious about sales. They go to QBRs, they do ride-alongs, they listen to calls on Gong. They do anything they can do they sit amongst the sellers if they're co-located. Like all they can do to absorb and learn and become a better student of sales. This also includes about the product and about your competition, the customers. Like they're really curious and they're diving into all those things, and they have absolutely been a front row student of sales. If they do that, that is worth 10x a couple of years of carrying a bag, because that's the gift that will keep on giving. Their curiosity and their aptitude is immeasurably important. And so I think if you can get that in a person, that goes a really long way, because again, if you get the person who's curious, it'll carry as they move up the chain and work at more and more senior roles with you. That is really important. So I think first and foremost, understanding sales. You don't have to carry the bag to understand it, but really be curious and understand it very well. That is very important. I think that's the biggest thing to look for. And the other things I mentioned before are really key, but just that curiosity and drive to run it like a business. How are you with my controversial statement?
I'm thinking how to respond. Look, I agree and disagree, and I tell you why. When we're looking at someone head of enablement position, VP of enablement position, so obviously this person is going to hire a number of reps under her or his arms, right? So it's not that they're going to go on one-on-one sessions with the reps. They have a really strategic position, at least based on customers that I'm working with.
Sure.
I would like, as a seller, to understand if an enablement rep, at least, that communicating with me about the importance of changing certain behaviors about the way I sell, I would love to see some background in sales. But to your point, this is a double-edged sword. What if they were not actually high-performing reps or only did transactional? We never actually think about it that way. I didn't. So I really like what you're saying. Are we really looking at their background truly to understand they've been even in that level to give you suggestion, let's say as an enterprise seller who's closing 7-8 figure deals, or no, maybe they just did transactional. This is really, really interesting point. I need to think about it a little bit more, but I agree with you in terms of like head of sales and bigger positions.
And I'll piggyback on what you're saying, because I think we're directionally going the same place. If I were, I'll use your example. If I were taking over enablement at a company, or even just enablement person at a company, and it's an enterprise sales motion, and maybe I was an SMB rep, and I've never done really large, complex transactions. I might say I'm going to do a lot of enablement stuff. However, for coaching those reps, I'm going to find a way to either deputize or find another way to get them the soft skills coaching that they might need, because candidly, I don't have it yet. And then I'm working on building that by listening to a lot of their calls and learning as much as I can. But maybe in the short term, I'm going to coach their managers, make sure their managers have a structured coaching program that they can give them. So it's not that I have to have all the answers. I'm orchestrating. And again, that goes back to my very first point earlier today, is I have to have the people skills to understand what I can do, what I can't do, and then deputize and orchestrate across the rest of the organization to get those needs met. I'm not saying, me as the SMB rep going out there and trying to pretend like I've closed an 8-figure deal, but I'm saying know where I am and know where I'm not, and then solve it for it a different way.
This is really fascinating. Tell me about like technology. So right now, again, one of the topics we talk about, coaching the coach, or giving coaching through your leadership. What is it that we can truly measure and say, my sales enablement leader brings certain, strategic advantages to the organization that technology alone cannot do?
Yeah, and I'll first double down on the premise of I think manager enablement is the most underfunded thing that has the highest ROI, period. People often do rep-centric enablement, and there's a a lot of value in that. But if I had $1, I would spend probably 50%, if not more, on the manager, because again, as coaches and otherwise, when you raise their levels, all ships rise. If you can have uniformity across your managers of how they play, how they coach, all the things that they do, then truly all ships rise. So the premise of manager, I am all in. I think that's spot on. And I think it's a point that's missed with a lot of revenue leaders and a lot of enablement folks. And that's the place to invest. Having said that, yeah, I think, technology it's falling from the trees right now, and it's doing a lot of really amazing stuff. I'm a big fan and believer in leveraging technologies across enablement and the go-to-market function in general. But I think it's obviously not a replacement of leaders and people. And so I'll give it's a silly analogy. These are just tools, right? They're tools, but you have to know how to use them and what to use them for. If there was a big construction site a mile away with the most sophisticated construction equipment there, and I walk on there one day and I'm in charge. I don't know how to use the equipment or what they're used for because I've never spent a day in the industry. And so if I don't know that, I don't care how great the technology is or the equipment is, it doesn't matter. And so I think as I think about the technology and how it's kind of coming into our space, it's incumbent upon us to understand, the fundamentals of our roles have not changed. Like we're here to grow revenue and to solve revenue problems. And in some ways, the technology can be a distraction to that because there's just so much noise going on. And so I think the what we do is still the same, but the how we do it is where technology comes into it. But still, somebody's got to orchestrate. Somebody's got to say, this is the problem we're trying to solve. Now let's find the best way to solve that. Maybe it's technology, maybe it's not. But somebody has to do that. And I feel like this skill that needs to, the muscle that we need to grow is that of a business analyst. And like, what are we trying to solve? And again, I think you asked this or mentioned this earlier, is understanding like what are the problems we're solving and why, and is this a real problem? Because again, there's tons of hammers looking for nails out there, and so focusing first as a business analyst, looking at the business and saying, okay, where are our problems, our bottlenecks, where are opportunities? Okay, are those big enough to invest in? If so, how much? Then, okay, how do we want to leverage technology or not to solve that problem? But the analyst skills are the ones that I think will become increasingly important because these tools are everywhere. And from my point of view, it's less about how you use it, like how to operate the tool as opposed to what to use it for. And I think just having that macro level understanding of like the tools in the toolkit and then how to apply them, that's the key thing, because we could spend all day long and over tool our team. All of a sudden we have diminishing returns across all the tools.
This is a really important perspective. And I love that example. To your point, like tech alone won't change business problems if we don't even know what problem we're solving, right? But let me ask you a follow-up question in this, because again, we heard two very different opinions. Like I had some folks on the show and they said, look, enablers, they should be hands-on. They should actually get their hands dirty and know how to use the tool. So this way, again, any changes, any shifts with AI, anything comes in, they're ready. They be the admin if needs be. Some other folks said, no, you have to, again, be strategic and find people who can leverage the tool. You bring the vision as to why we need this, these tools to be in place in the first place. So I wanted to hear your perspective. Do we really need super enabled, AI enabled enablers for the future? Or as long as you know how to find resources to use this tool, that should be sufficient?
I think that's a false choice. I think you can be the senior person who is orchestrating, understanding the use cases of the tools without being in it, without being the admin, all that stuff. But also in some organizations, they are the default admins of tools, and that's okay. It just, as long as somebody owns it, and the revenue leader or operations leader might decide who's going to own the tools in the company, and that's based on where they are in the organization and their skill sets, and there's a few different things. So I don't know that it must be this or that. I think that's false. I think both roles have to be met. You have to have strategic overview of tooling and like how we're getting these things done. And somebody's got to own it. Now, whether that falls on me or somebody else, I don't think there's a blanket, it must be this or that. I think it's organization to organization. It'll depend. I just think it's an overly blunt way to say it must be this or it must be that.
All right, fair enough. Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With Sell Me the Spend AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at sellmethisman.ai. So tell me about your recommendation to a CRO who already hired an enablement person. And unfortunately, the enablement leader is struggling. What should we do?
First, take a deep breath, like I just did. So again, it's all about the nuance, and so I try to lean into the nuance. So let's kind of, and I'll try and be brief, but parse this out. So if you look at the person who's running Enable and it's not working out, ask yourself why. And sometimes they've not been given the latitude and the tools and the ability to do what they need to do. And so I think there is some sense of like, have they been given the ability, have they been set up for success or not? And that's a little soul searching that has to happen sometimes. But sometimes, like I'll give an example I see a bit, is when we hire our enablement head here, our company grows from here to here, maybe we double, triple in size. Our needs got a lot more complex. And that guy, Dave, we hired, he was great for the first 3 years, but now like he's a little bit out of his league now. But we like him. The team, he's a super hard worker. He's very smart. There's some new stuff for him he hasn't done, and he's not really good at building ROI and stakeholder management, a few things that he's got to do now. What do we do? So like on examples like that, I think what most folks do is they'll say, fire Dave, or we're going to level him, like put somebody above him who has these extra skills. And both are okay options. But I think there's even a third option that I would recommend in that situation, where what if you brought in a person for advisory services, X number of hours per week or per month to help upskill them on those specific things that you want them to have, but they don't have them yet. And we talk about skill versus will. Do they not want to do it, or can they not do it? And if they have the will, just not the skills, that's a coachable thing. And so I find sometimes a very modest investment in upskilling them in those particular areas where they're a little bit deficient. It's a win for everybody because it's a low cost way to get your person who's already there and knows the business to the level they need to be. So that's like this situation where they're just a little bit out of their depth in the job. However, often is a time also where, and I talk to CROs who tell me this all the time, I have my person, or I had my person, I fired them because they just weren't getting it done. The field did not like them. They were just not getting stuff done. They just loved to run reports, or they weren't immersed with our field and it just wasn't working out. So that's a very different scenario. And if that's the case, then you have to make some hard choices and replace the person. I do feel strongly that when you're picking the head of enablement, you've got to get that piece right, because they then will hire a couple of people beneath them and sort of build out the org. And if the head person is wrong, then they're going to set the chessboard with all the wrong pieces in all the wrong places. And that becomes a very long tail problem. I think you got to get that person right. And when I work with companies, like I talk to them a lot about, what is the right background? What is the right profile? And as a little example, I always hear people say, we're a force management shop, therefore they must be certified in force management and having rolled out at 3 different companies. And we're in the cybersecurity space, therefore they must have come from that space. They have all these things they really firmly believe are must-haves. And part of what I do is I kind of talk about those ledges sometimes. Like, I get your point, but if you over-index on those things, it's at the expense of things that are probably going to be more important. Like, they can learn cyber. They can learn these things. Like, that's doable. But if they stink at their job and they don't have the gravitas or the relationship building skills, I don't care how good you are at force management, it's not going to matter. And so I try and help them index on the right things that give the biggest ROI. And sometimes they're off, sometimes they're on. But I think really getting that head right, and then can you build the team from there. You didn't mention this, but I'll throw this out there now. I think one of the things that a lot of folks get a little bit wrong on staffing is it's all about the FTEs. Like, I'm going to hire 4 or 5 people for this part of the, to manage this part of the portfolio of stuff, and this person for this part, and this person for this part. And I think even like we're gonna roll out force management next quarter. I'm gonna hire an expert at that because that's the DNA of how we want to sell. My strong contention is when you have a short term, high stakes project like a rollout or a sales kickoff or building battle cards or playbooks, like those are short term things. Like you build them and they get maintained, but you're building it and rolling it out once. In those things, the best ROI, both in terms of time and money, is you staff your team with your FTEs for your ongoing needs. But when you have these acute, short-term, high-value things, that's what consultants do. So if you said, my sales team, they're great, but they stink at discovery. Their discovery skills they're just not as strong as they need to be. And it's costing us, we're losing deals and it's eroding our margins because we can't negotiate well. And so we need to get better at discovery. Dave, on my team, go off and figure it out and build it and roll it out so we can get better at that. That's what most folks do. And it makes sense. I have a guy and he's a smart guy, he'll figure it out. But what I would contend is if it's really a high value thing, you want to bring in an expert who's rolled out discovery skills at 5, 10 different companies with great success. It's already built and they can customize it as they need to. They can come in, be airdropped in, and knock that out of the park. And it's quicker. They're better at it because it's battle proven. They've done it a bunch of times. That is a better return on the investment than Dave going off and figuring it out and coming back with the best he could do and doing a B minus level job. And so I think of hybrid workforces, like a different complexion of full-time versus some fractional, is a way to really staff, but it all starts with the head.
I love this. Like, honestly, this is really, really important what you said, because I've seen this problem happening within my own clientele that, hey, we need to bring a methodology. We just ran it, scattered all over. This is the time. Can you help me? Can you introduce some of your folks from your network so we can hire someone? And this is a very smart, way to look at things. This is a high stake problem that we need to solve ASAP.
Yeah.
And even if someone rolled it out in 1 or 2 organizations, things are different here. Like, yes, maybe it's in the same vertical, to your point, cybersecurity, but your company's DNA is different. The executive vision is different. Your sellers might be different. So many other nuances into that. Why not bringing an expert, to your point, to do an A plus work, and you take your time and find someone. I want to go back to what you said at the beginning, who has very important core skills. Curiosity. Are they genuinely curious to even learn about your organization, to grow with you? Because their skill set needs to change, especially considering the macroeconomics and everything that is happening around us. They need to change. Maybe, yes, you are a medic shop or whatever. Maybe you need to change it. You cannot have this closed mind about business, especially today. So that person comes maybe with different skill sets, but they can upskill themselves while walking with you throughout this journey. I really love what you said. It's really smart to look at it this way.
I'll just say it this way, in a very blunt way of thinking about it. It's like for these revenue leaders, is this a mission critical thing? So whether it's discovery skills or the methodology rollout, like, is this really mission critical? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, I would say, like, if you're going to have heart surgery, right? Like critical heart surgery, do you want them to fly in the world's expert from Geneva to do your heart surgery, or whoever might be on staff at the hospital that night? And it's that simple. It's like whoever's on your staff, they'll just kind of figure it out. Or do you want to bring in an expert who can do this? And so that's kind of how I think about it. Very kind of crude example, but if it's truly mission critical, do you leave it with the guy on staff at the hospital, or do you bring in an expert? And if it's truly mission critical, it becomes a no-brainer in my mind.
This is amazing. Look, now let's talk about something more, practical that they can put into place right away. We hire someone right now. What sort of metrics and KPIs we need to put into place to really assess the efficacy of our senior leader practices moving forward?
That's a tricky one because most enablement folks, I'm going to answer your question in a roundabout way. Their comp plan is like they have a base and then a bonus, and the bonus might be based purely on the CRO's number. Did he or she hit their number? And you get bonus based on some percentage of that. Other folks, depending on the organization, what their needs are, they might have some MBOs, like objectives that they've got to hit. Their review is based on how well do they hit those metrics. And again, if this is an expansion year, it might be for them, it might be about new logos or getting our team to discount less or whatever that might be for them, some near-term objectives or some combination thereof of like the CRO's number and the MBOs. Like that's how people are comped. And so the metrics for the most part, depending on whether you're this person enablement or this person, it's usually just tied to a revenue number. Like if my part of the world is I'm in charge of enabling the mid-market team, my number, my bonus should be tied to how well did the mid-market team hit their number, because that's who I'm there to affect. And so, if I were a revenue leader or a comp specialist, what I would say is you want to think about the broader picture, but also near term, what do we have to get right this quarter or this year? And you kind of bonus them based on those near term things, because at the end of the day, it's all about attainment. But what that looks like from organization to organization might vary based on maturity of company and stage of growth. But so I think it's some combination of like just the number and objectives that are based on where you are and what your near-term challenges or opportunities are.
Makes sense. So let me just flip the coin. Not for enablers out there, because we always talk about what's a good comp plan for our sellers.
Yeah.
Someone was mentioning like, yes, there are different structures, but what really works best for a seller to earn as much as possible? Which one of these models do you think, based on your experience, you've seen that be more lucrative for enablers out there?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the hybrid of like, say 50% based on the number and 50% based on objectives, because ultimately we all have some skin in the game. So being tied to the number makes a lot of sense. But also I want things as enabler that I can control and that I know are a little more tactical and near term, that I have more direct influence over. So I'm a big believer in that. I cringe when people don't have a variable component to their comp plans. It happens, but I think they should have some skin in the game, and that the objectives really should reflect just like some very much what do we have to get done this quarter or this year that are mission critical, and have me maniacally focused on that. And we always joke, sales reps are coin operated. Like you build their comp plan this way, they're going to do that. And this is, the MBOs are Enablement's version of that. Of like, I'm going to get them to turn these dials. And if that happens, if you say, my half of my bonus is based on these MBOs, you can't keep changing priorities midway through the year 5 times. Like we gotta adjust those things. So I think it needs to have some grounding and some permanence. And if things change, that's great. Then maybe switch up my MBOs. But I do think the hybrid approach is the one that works best.
Awesome. To wrap it up, everybody keeps hearing about AI. So I want to hear from your perspective. It's still a new thing for many enablers out there. Like I chatted a lot, and a lot of folks out there, maybe they use ChatGPT at its, the best.
Yeah.
And they don't know even what's out there. But I wanted to hear, what are the new competencies that are really essential for success in this position, moving forward?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. I think first and foremost, I'll go back to my point before about being a business analyst. Again, it's just another tool. So how do you apply the tool to the business? So I think that's just foundational. And I will say, if I were interviewing for any enablement role today, and I'm not conversant on the tools and how they apply to the sales stack and sellers and enablement in particular, like I just wouldn't bother showing up to the interview. It should come up in every interview, and you should be able to have a point of view. Not that you have to be an expert in every tool, because that's not feasible anymore. The matrix of tools, it's like you need a microscope, truly. And so I don't think it's about knowing all the tools, but knowing categories and what this tool does versus that tool, and how they can be used to drive results. And so I think being a little bit of a student of the landscape of tools and the lanes of the tools categories is really important. So I think being aware and being plugged in, and I would not want to interview and not be at least somewhat conversant in the categories of the tools. And by the way, if you're interviewing for a company and they're not diving into AI and that's not a thing there, I probably wouldn't go to that company because it tells you how they approach innovation and how
Mhm.
they evolve or not. And so I think almost that's like a reverse litmus test of like pinging you and pushing you on that stuff. That's the thing you would ask them of like, hey, how are you leveraging AI internally just to test, are they the Flintstones or are they the Jetsons? And so
Mm.
because it's two very, very different worlds. So I think I would think about that competency of just having a sense of the landscape. You don't have to be a technologist, but you
Mhm.
have to understand the applications of the technology. And so I think that's the thing I think about. And the last thing I'll say is there's so much to buy. And so understanding how to build a use case, like an ROI use case for like, we're going to
Mhm.
spend, $80,000 on a call intelligence platform. So what's that going to get us? What problem are we solving and all that stuff. And so building an ROI around that. And because somebody in finance, probably a CFO, is going to have to sign a check for it. And if you can't build a business case for these tools, you're not going to get approval.
All right. So I guess we finish it on a high note, and really appreciate you joining me today. Like I really enjoyed this conversation and hope you guys really learned something new today. And Dave, if someone wants to reach out to you first and foremost, can they and how?
You can go to EnableMatch.com and there's a form there, or Dave at EnableMatch.com. All those work. LinkedIn as well, Dave Lichtman, Lichtman. But I'm not hard to find.
All right. Amazing. All right, man. All the best and until next time.
All right,
Bye for now.
cheers.
Cheers.